Bambu Studio has some brilliant tools for modifying models right in the slicer, great for last minute tweaks and customizing something you just downloaded. This includes the text tool, which allows you to add 3D text to any object. I briefly covered this in my Bambu Studio beginners tutorial, but now I'd like to give you a closer run through, going through some tips and tricks and ways of using it that you may not have been aware of. So let's take a look. With your object selected in Bambu Studio, click the text tool in the toolbar at the top. Before we go through all the options here, let's enter some text in the input text box at the bottom. If we now hover the mouse over the model, you can see that the text that we've entered now appears in 3D sticking to the side of the object. If I now move the mouse around and therefore the text, you can see the letters wrap around the edges of the object. Find where you want to place the text for now and then left click. This will add the text here, but don't worry, this doesn't need to be its final position and you can move it again later. You can see that whilst the text does wrap around the object, because each letter is a solid object itself, each letter remains in the orientation of the flat side that more than 50% of it touches. Now you've applied it, you can see a pink cube has appeared. This represents the centre of the text, and if you click and drag this around, it'll allow you to move the text with it. The first of the options here is font selection. You can technically select pretty much whatever font you want, including your own fonts and those that you've downloaded. However, I find that many of these, especially the less conventional ones, don't seem to work. So if you select a new font and it either doesn't change the text of your model or changes back to a default font, don't worry, you're not doing something wrong, it's just frustratingly a compatibility issue. The size option simply changes the size of the font but keeps the spacing relative. You also have the standard bold and italic options here, but that only works with fonts that have bold and italic options for it. The thickness setting allows you to determine how far out you want the text to stick from your model. If the text is sticking out of your model horizontally, and if you've set a thickness that's too large here, you may need to apply support material to the underneath of it, but this obviously depends on what style you're going for and the orientation of your object and text. Now you can't set this to a negative number, this only goes down to 0.01mm and this tool only allows you to add text as an extrusion sticking out of your model. But don't worry, if you want your text to be cut or engraved into your print, you can do this with a little trick which I'll show you later in this video. The next option is text gap, and this changes the spacing between the letters. Through a mix of this and the size tool, you can make sure your text perfectly fills the space that you are wanting to apply it to. Next we have angle, which allows you to rotate the text if you didn't want it running horizontally along your object. Now we have embedded depth. Whilst the text remains an extrusion sticking out of your print, this will extend the text back inside your object by the amount that you set. By default this is set to 0. If I set this to 15, in addition to the extrusion, the thickness at the front, it will now be sticking 15mm back inside the object. If I set this to 35mm, you can now see that the text is extending out the back of the other side of the object. Let's pop this back to 15 for a second. If you're printing this in one colour, when you slice it, you'll see that it makes absolutely no difference having an embedded depth as they merge and become a single object during the slicing process. If however you go to the object list and select the text, right click it and apply a different filament specifically to the text, when you slice it, you'll see that the text now extends the set depth inside the model in its selected colour. This ties in really nicely with my painting at depth tutorial which I recently published, explaining how you can paint not just the surface of your models but also the interior volume as well. If you'd like to know more about why this is useful, check out my painting in depth tutorial which I'll link to in the video description and at the end of this video. Back in the text tool, the final section of options is about positioning your text. By default, surface is ticked, and as we saw earlier, as we drag this around, it always sticks to the side of the object and wraps around the edges. If we untick this and then click and drag the pink box, the text will be stuck to the surface of the object, but it will no longer wrap around the corners, so it will remain a straight line of text and can stick out the edges of the model. Now the pink cube is the point which always needs to be connected to the object, and this is always in the middle of the text. So right now, if I wanted the text to be sticking more than halfway out the side of the object, as I drag it to the side, it suddenly flips to the next facet around the corner. To get around this, you can just add some spaces at the start or end of the text, and the text will then be slid along in the opposite direction. You could then adjust the letter spacing so that the letters are physically touching, extend the embedded depth figure to be the same as the object depth, set the thickness to 0.01mm, and then you can have the text start as a flat coloration on the side of your object and continue out the side in 3D. To demonstrate the final option we have here, we require a curved surface, so I'm going to create a cone and then apply some new text to that. You can see that the text has, by default, wrapped around the object. If we turn off surface, it sticks out straight, but we'll turn that back on again for now. The final option in this section is horizontal text. If we check this box, it keeps the text wrapping around the object, but on a horizontal line relative to the build area rather than following the curve of the object. This could be really useful if you wanted text running along the bottom of an object without curving down into the base. You'll notice when you come out of the text tool, you lose the ability to move the text around, and you can't even select it directly. If you click on it, you'll select the root object it was applied to and not the text. To go back into the text settings, go to the objects list, select the text shape that you want to edit, and then select the text tool again. Finally, I mentioned earlier that although this tool explicitly extrudes text from an object, it is possible to use this tool to engrave or cut out your text from an object. To do this, let's create some new text. The thickness doesn't matter, and we'll just adjust the other settings so that the text looks as we like. Now, set the embedded depth to the depth that you'd like your text to be engraved. Now, come out of the text tool and go to the objects list. Find the text shape, right-click it, and select Change Type. By default, it'll be set to part, which basically means it's an additional part being added to an existing object. In this drop-down menu, select Negative Part, which means that this shape will be subtracted from the object that it's applied to. If we slice it now, you'll see that the text has now been cut away from your object rather than being extruded. And that's my quick rundown of the text tool in Bambu Studio. It is fairly basic, but as I showed with the negative part trick at the end there, you can use these tools out of context to achieve additional things. In a similar way, because the text is added as a separate part, you can add specific settings just to that text. So not only can you set a specific color to the text, but you could also add things like just ironing the text, or add fuzzy skin to really make it stand out. I hope you found this useful. It really makes my day when I hear that my videos have helped people. If you did like this and you found it useful, please do hit that like button and hit subscribe if you'd like to see more of my videos in the future. If you really liked it, you can hit the join button below my video and become a channel member, getting early access to my videos, exclusive access to the 3D Rev Discord community, and a members discount at 3drevolutionstore.com, where you'll find a growing range of 3D printing and maker-themed clothing and accessories. For now, thanks very much everyone, and until next time, happy printing. Thanks for sticking around, and a huge thank you to my channel members, my 3D revolutionaries. If you haven't seen it yet, don't forget to check out my painting with depth tutorial, or slip into one of my other videos to learn something new or have some fun. Thanks very much everyone, and until next time, happy printing.